A dozen men stand on a ridge east of Jerusalem, staring up at empty sky. The midday sun is beating down on their necks. The promise of the return becomes the heartbeat of the New Testament. But how we read those promises today has shifted. It appears only 6 times in the entire New Testament. Its linguistic root combines epi, meaning upon, and pheno, meaning to shine upon. It is exactly where we get the modern English word epiphany. But to a first-century Greek speaker, this was an emergency word. It described a sudden, blinding intervention, a rescue breaking violently through the dark. A military general cresting a hill with a massive, unstoppable army, right when a besieged city is about to fall. The enemy drops their weapons in terror. The citizens fall to their knees in relief. The sudden light hits the battlefield. Paul uses this exact same word in 2 Timothy 1:10. He writes that grace was already revealed through the epiphania of Jesus at his first coming, when he broke the power of death. The first strike of light shattered the ancient darkness. Now Titus waits for the second. That root completely changes how you read the passage. The return of Christ is not a gradual sunrise. It is a lightning strike. It is sudden. It is absolute. It is unmistakable. Paul gives an exhausted church an epiphania. He promises a manifestation so bright it swallows the dark. The light hits the jagged rocks of Crete. The shadows vanish in a fraction of a second. The violent culture loses all its atmospheric power. Every hidden thing is flooded with unapproachable, undeniable light. But this sudden flash of light does not. Most people assume the biblical prophecies about Christ's return are a timeline meant to be decoded. Just rescue the beleaguered believers. It does not just expose the empires of men. The physical dirt they stand on is desperate for it too. We treat the physical planet like a disposable coffee cup. We assume the earth is just a temporary stage for a spiritual drama, a cursed rock floating in space that will eventually be thrown into a cosmic incinerator while our souls escape to a disembodied heaven. We look at the rust eating through iron, the soil cracking under a merciless drought, the heavy scent of decay in an autumn forest, and we assume this is just the tragic, irreversible nature of material things. But the Apostle Paul looks at that exact same decay and hears something completely different. He writes to the church in Rome and tells them to listen to the dirt. Romans chapter 8, verse 21. He says that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. He does not describe the physical universe as a sinking ship. He describes it as a labor ward. The decay we see is not the final rattle of a dying planet. It is the contraction before a birth. Paul says the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God, to be revealed. The Greek word he uses for eager expectation is apokaradokia. It is a stunning, intensely physical image. We look at the texts like encrypted puzzles, searching for geopolitical clues, matching blood moons with news headlines, and charting out dispensations on whiteboards. It literally means to crane your neck forward. It means to stand on your tiptoes, peering over the heads of a crowd, straining your eyes to see someone coming down a long road. The mountains, the oceans, the soil, the cedar trees, they are on their tiptoes. They are watching the horizon for the parousia, because they know that the return of the king is the end of the curse. When humanity rebelled in Eden, the ground itself absorbed the shockwave. Thorns pierced the soil. Entropy invaded the ecosystem. The physical world was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but because the stewards of the garden handed their authority over to death. So, the earth is waiting for its stewards to be fully restored. Because a redeemed humanity means a redeemed habitat, Christ is not returning to abandon the material world. He is coming back to resurrect it. The promises of his return completely obliterate the ancient heresy that matter does not matter. The physical universe is deeply, profoundly loved by the God who spoke it into existence. He does not throw away what he makes. He heals it. Every atom will be brought under the sovereign, loving rule. of the returned king. But long before Paul wrote his theology to Rome, and long before Peter wrote his warnings, we assume the point of the prophecy is to figure out the exact sequence of the escape from a damp cell. The very first promise of this return was spoken in a private room, and the words used in that room were not political. And they were not cosmic. They were deeply, heartbreakingly intimate. Shadows dance against the stone walls of an upper room in Jerusalem. The smell of roasted lamb and sour wine lingers in the warm air. The disciples' feet are still damp from the basin where the man who commands oceans just knelt with a towel like a slave. The heavy wooden door has just closed behind Judas, who has stepped out into the dark. The night outside is thick and dangerous, and Jesus looks at 11 terrified men and drops a shattering truth onto the table. He is leaving. Peter's voice cracks. The panic rises in their throats. They have given up their nets, their families, their reputations, and now he is walking into the jaws of the empire without them. Jesus looks into their wide, frightened eyes. He does not give them a scroll of apocalyptic beasts. He does not hand them a timeline of geopolitical events. He does not sketch out a chart of future plagues. He leans in and speaks the language of a Galilean wedding. But if you look closer at the actual Greek words the first Christians used, at the cultural context of the Roman Empire they lived in, do not let your hearts be troubled. In my Father's house are many rooms. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me. Every man in that room recognizes the cultural blueprint. In the ancient world, when a couple was betrothed, they did not move in together immediately. The groom would leave his bride. He would return to his father's estate. He would gather timber and stone. He would spend months building a new room. An addition to the family home. The groom could not return for his bride until the father looked at the construction and declared it finished. The bride would simply wait in her own home, keeping her oil lamps trimmed, not knowing the exact month or hour, but completely trusting the character of the builder. And when that day finally came, the groom would march through the streets at night, torches burning, voices singing, coming to bring his bride to the place he had built with his own hands. Jesus is looking at his followers and giving them a vow. Notice the specific wording of the comfort. He does not say, "I will come back and take you to heaven." He says, "I will come back and take you to myself, that you also may be where I am." The ultimate promise of his return. You start to see something the timeline decoders completely miss. The return of Christ is not an evacuation plan. It is an invasion, is not a geographic relocation. It is a relational proximity. The parousia is the royal visit. The apocalypsis is the ripped veil. The epiphania is the sudden light. But the upper room is the heartbeat beneath all of it. They are not waiting for an eschatological event. They are waiting for a person. But standing in the 21st century, 2 millennia removed from the warmth of that ancient room, the modern church has largely forgotten this intimacy. We have traded the bridegroom for a puzzle. And that trade has produced a very specific kind of paralysis. We are a species obsessed with control. We hate the unknown. We hate the dark. We hate the vulnerable posture of waiting for a footstep we cannot predict. So we build charts. We draw elaborate timelines on dry erase boards. We connect cable news headlines with ancient verses using red string. We watch the geopolitical shift of empires on glowing screens. We track the blood moons. We parse the treaties. We buy paperbacks that promise to decode the final hour. We consume algorithms that guarantee they have cracked the hidden numeric code. We take the deeply intimate promise of the upper room and we flatten it into a sterile math equation. This obsession with dates is not preparation. It is paralysis. When you stare exclusively at the distant horizon, you ignore the bleeding world right in front of your feet. Jesus was not offering a bumper sticker of generic hope. He was diagnosing a world that is groaning under the weight of decay. When you spend all your cognitive energy calculating the exact moment of his arrival, if you stop doing the actual work he assigned you in his absence, Jesus explicitly told his disciples that no one knows the day or the hour. He deliberately kept the timeline hidden. He did not hide it to frustrate them. He hid it to activate them. Look at the parables he tells right after the promises. The servants are not praised for knowing the hour. They are praised for managing the estate. The virgins are not praised for predicting the midnight cry. They are praised for carrying oil. The sheep are not separated from the goats based on their eschatological charts. They are separated by whether they clothed the naked, fed the hungry, and visited the damp prison cells. The prophecy of his return is not a riddle to be solved. It is a reality to be lived. If we truly believe he is returning to resurrect this earth, it changes how we treat the actual dirt today. If we truly believe he is returning to burn away corrupt systems in a holy fire, it changes how we spend our money, how we treat the poor, how we leverage our power today. Every act of justice becomes a preview, and he was promising a comprehensive restoration of the material universe. The promises of his return were not written to satisfy our curiosity about the future. Every act of mercy becomes a trailer. Every act of defiant love becomes a sudden flash of the epiphania breaking through the dark. But stepping into that kind of active waiting is terrifying, because it requires a deeply personal pivot. Picture a servant standing by a stone window in the ancient Near East. The sun has dipped below the jagged hills. The clay oil lamp is flickering against the limestone walls, and the heavy wooden doors of the estate are barred for the night. He does not know if the master's chariot will crest the ridge tonight, tomorrow, or a decade from now, but his hands are stained with the dark soil of the vineyards. And his cloak smells like crushed grapes, because he has spent the entire day working the exact land his master entrusted to him. That is the precise posture of the New Testament church. Readiness is not a state of frantic anxiety, constantly checking the horizon while the fields turn to weeds. Readiness is a state of faithful alignment. We look at the long, grueling centuries of human history, at the relentless cycles of war and famine. They were written to dictate our allegiance in the present. The real question of these ancient texts isn't, when will the sky roll back? It's this, and we often mistake the silence of the clouds for a broken vow. We assume that because the Roman Empire fell, and other empires rose, and the world is still groaning under the weight of its own systemic corruption, the promise has somehow expired. We look at the delay, and we grow cynical. The silence is not an abandonment. It is a sovereign patience. If you are in a season where you feel utterly exhausted by the relentless darkness of the culture around you, it is incredibly tempting to retreat. It is easy to lock your doors, hide in your safe theological bunkers, and simply wait for the trumpet to sound the evacuation alarm. You start treating the magnificent promises of his return as a psychological escape hatch from a material world you no longer want to engage with. But that defensive posture completely abandons the royal mandate of the Parousia. If you are in a season where the world feels dangerously out of control, you do not need a more accurate geopolitical timeline to give you peace. You need a deeper trust in the character of the bridegroom. The call of these ancient texts, what kind of world is he coming back to reclaim? To find the answer, you cannot start in the complex. Apocalyptic visions of Revelation is to plant faithful gardens in a society you know is going to be overthrown. Precisely because you know the true king is coming back to reclaim the soil, you are called to heal the sick, to demand justice for the oppressed, and to aggressively push back the dark, standing firmly on the absolute guarantee that the unapproachable light is about to break through. Because when you take all of these disparate promises, all of these scattered Greek words, and weave them into a single continuous fabric, the final picture is absolutely blinding. A dozen men stand on a ridge east of Jerusalem, staring up at empty sky. The wind dies down. The dust settles slowly around their sandals. The two messengers in blinding white have spoken, and the ancient echo begins to travel through the centuries. A grieving church looks at fresh graves in Thessalonica, and a royal state visit is promised to wake the dead. An imprisoned fisherman writes to an exhausted generation, and a thief is promised to burn away the stolen empires. A lonely exile stares at the violent sea of Patmos, and a ripped veil is promised to expose the true sovereign. And the smell of crushed olive leaves hangs heavy in the air. They are not squinting at a metaphor. You have to start earlier. You have to step into the first letters ever circulated among the earliest believers. A young pastor fights a chaotic culture in Crete, and a sudden light is promised to shatter the shadows. A groaning creation strains its neck forward, and a cosmic birth is promised to heal the broken dirt. A terrified room of disciples watches their rabbi leave, and a bridegroom is promised to return for his bride. A fractured, tired, waiting world cries out for justice, and the Son of Man is promised to finally step through the clouds. Same promise, same king. But here's the part I keep coming back to. Not the apocalyptic fire, not the political exposure of Rome, not even the breathtaking image of the cedar trees standing on their tiptoes. It is the basin, the man who promised to split the sky, the sovereign who will arrive in unapproachable light, is the exact same man who knelt on a stone floor with a linen towel and washed the grime off the feet of his betrayers. The king we are waiting for is not a distant tyrant coming to conquer. He is a wounded healer coming to restore. If you are in a season where you feel entirely abandoned in the waiting, if you are staring at the unbroken cycle of seasons, watching the darkness of the culture, and wondering if the sky will ever actually open, remember the character of the builder. People who fully expected the clouds to tear open before their ink was even dry. The place to start is with a single Greek word. The delay is not a broken vow. It is a profound mercy. He is holding the door open. He is giving you time to tend the estate. And may the God, who has sworn to return and remake the physical universe, meet you in the middle of your faithful waiting and give you the quiet, unshakable courage to plant a garden in the ruins. Paul uses to comfort a grieving community, a word that did not mean what we think it means. The year is roughly 50 AD, and the believers in the thriving port city of Thessalonica are starting to panic. Paul writes them a letter to address a crisis that none of them saw coming. People in their community are dying. They are burying their brothers and sisters in the hard Mediterranean soil, weeping under the heavy heat of the Grecian sun. They had assumed Jesus was returning in their immediate lifetimes. Now, staring at freshly dug graves, they are terrified that those who have died have somehow missed out on the kingdom. Paul writes 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 to calm their dread. He tells them that the dead in Christ will rise first. He says the living will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. But the word Paul anchors this entire comfort around is completely flattened. They are staring at a physical cloud that has just enveloped the rabbi they ate fish with hours ago. In our English translations, the word translated coming in verse 15 is the Greek parousia. It appears 24 times in the New Testament. At its most basic linguistic level, it simply means presence or arrival. The root combines para, meaning beside or with, and ousia, meaning being or substance. But if you lived in the 1st century Roman Empire, you did not use this word for a friend dropping by your house for dinner. Parousia was a heavily loaded, highly political term. It was the official, technical word used for the imperial state visit of a Caesar, or a high-ranking Roman official to a conquered province. When an emperor planned a parousia, the local government went into a frenzy. Taxes were levied to repair the cobblestone roads. Gold coins were newly minted with the emperor's profile to commemorate the date. Commemorative banners were draped across stone arches. The arrival was a massive, sensory explosion of imperial power, and this cultural context changes exactly how we are supposed to read Paul's famous imagery of meeting Jesus in the clouds. In the ancient Roman world, when the emperor's procession finally arrived, the citizens of the hosting city did not sit inside their houses and wait for him to knock on their doors. The leading citizens would deliberately leave the city gates, travel out onto the open road. Their necks ache from looking up. The wind kicks up dust around their sandals. But no one blinks. No one moves. No one speaks. To meet the royal entourage, and then proudly escort the king back into the city he was visiting. That changes everything about how we view the passage. When Paul tells the grieving Thessalonians they will meet the Lord in the air, he is invoking the exact civic protocol of a Roman imperial visit. The believers are the welcoming committee. They are going up to meet the returning king, not to float away with him into the ether forever, but to escort him back down to the very earth he intends to heal and rule. The parousia is not an evacuation order. It is an escort protocol. Paul is taking the ultimate symbol of Roman dominance and subverting it entirely. He is telling a grieving church that Caesar is not the true sovereign. The true king is currently absent, but his state visit is guaranteed. And you want to be found faithfully maintaining his province when the trumpet sounds. But while Paul gives the early church the comfort of a royal arrival, another letter circulating through the ancient Mediterranean world frames this exact same event with a much more violent metaphor. Peter sits in a damp Roman cell. The stone floor is cold against his bones. The oil in his solitary clay lamp is running dangerously low, until two figures in blinding white clothes step into their peripheral vision and break the silence. Men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking into the sky? He is an old man now, his hands calloused from decades of pulling nets and planting churches. He knows the executioner is coming, but he is not writing about his own death. He is writing about the scoffers. Decades have passed since that afternoon on the Mount of Olives. The skies over Jerusalem remain violently empty. The Roman soldiers still march through the streets. The taxes still crush the poor. The mockers stand in the marketplaces, hands on their hips, and laugh at the early believers. Where is this coming, he promised? They point to the unbroken cycle of seasons. They point to the silent clouds. Everything continues exactly as it has since the beginning of creation. Peter dips his reed pen into the ink. He writes his second and final letter. To answer the scoffers, he reaches for a violent, terrifying image that Jesus himself used on the Mount of Olives. He does not describe a royal procession. He does not describe a state visit with banners and trumpets. He describes a home invasion. A thief does not announce his arrival. A thief does not mint commemorative coins. A thief does not send a herald ahead of his chariot. A thief waits for the heavy, defenseless sleep of midnight. The metal lock turns in silence. The wooden floorboard creaks. The shadows shift in the hallway. You open your eyes in the dark. This is the moment the clock starts. The messengers make a promise that echoes through the next 2,000 years of human history, your heart pounding against your ribs. And suddenly, the house is no longer yours. The day of the Lord will come like a thief. Peter is grabbing his readers by the shoulders and shaking them awake. He describes the heavens disappearing with a deafening roar. He describes the material elements melting in the intense heat. He describes the earth and everything done in it being completely laid bare. The mockers look at the passing decades and see a broken promise. They look at the delay and assume divine absence. But Peter flips the timeline entirely. The delay is not a cancellation. It is a mercy. He writes that the Lord is not slow in keeping his promise. As some understand slowness, he is patient. He is holding the door open. He does not want anyone to perish in the coming fire. And that fire is heavily misunderstood. Peter uses language that sounds like total destruction. But the Greek word he uses at the climax of this cosmic blaze is heurethesetai. It means to be found, to be uncovered, to be completely exposed. The fire is not an agent of annihilation. It is an instrument of purification. It burns away the rot. It burns away the political corruption. It burns away the empires built on human blood. Everything built on greed turns to ash in a fraction of a second. This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go. But everything built on self-giving love survives the flames. The thief breaks in not to destroy the house, but to strip it of all its stolen goods. But a thief in the night and a royal parousia are only two facets of this promised return. There is a third image waiting, at the very end of the New Testament. And to see it, you have to pull back a curtain on reality itself. The heavy pages of a modern Bible flip to the final book, and the reader instinctively braces for a nightmare. We read the text and see dragons with 7 heads rising from the water. We see oceans turning into thick, coagulated blood. We see locusts swarming out of a bottomless pit, smoke darkening the sun, and stars plummeting into the earth, like late figs dropping from a shaken tree. We look at this bizarre, terrifying imagery, and we treat it like a heavily encrypted timeline. We assume it is a roadmap to the end of the world, a survival guide for a global collapse. But look closely at the very first word of the text in the original language. The first English word is usually translated simply as revelation. The Greek word is apocalypsis. It is exactly where we get the English word apocalypse. But to the first century mind, this word had absolutely nothing to do with the physical destruction of the planet or the end of the space-time continuum. From this single afternoon on the Mount of Olives, an obsession is born. The early church does not just believe he is coming back. The word is built from two distinct Greek pieces. The prefix apo means away from, or to remove, and the root kalama means a veil, or a covering. Apocalypsis literally means to pull back a curtain. It means to unveil something that is already firmly present, but previously hidden from your view. Paul uses this exact same noun in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 7. He is comforting a deeply persecuted church, promising them relief. When the Lord Jesus is revealed in the apocalypsis from heaven in blazing fire, that linguistic root changes everything about how we anticipate this event. An apocalypse is not a crystal ball showing a distant future. It is a ripped veil exposing a current reality. If realizing that these ancient words carry a totally different weight is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the curtain is pulled back. When Christ returns in an apocalypsis, he is not importing a foreign, alien reality down to the earth. He is stripping away the temporary illusion that the empires of men are actually in charge. He is ripping the covering off of the corrupt economic systems, the hidden political violence, and the secret greed of Rome and of every empire that follows her. They are actively listening for the footsteps. They write letters. They sing hymns. They bury their dead with this one specific anticipation, holding their fractured communities together. The return is a cosmic exposure. The unseen reality of Christ's total sovereignty, which has been true since the resurrection, is suddenly made visible to the naked human eye. But pulling back the curtain is only one dimension of his arrival, because, out on the island of Crete, a young pastor receives a letter describing this exact same moment with a word that demands a physical reaction. Waves crash against the jagged limestone. The wind howls across the Mediterranean, carrying the sharp, bitter smell of sea salt. The island of Crete is wild. The culture is notoriously violent. The new house churches are chaotic and fractured. Men lie. Leaders cheat. The believers are constantly surrounded by a pitch-black society. They are exhausted. They are weary from fighting the cultural current. A young pastor named Titus stands in the noise. He holds a piece of parchment in the heavy breeze. The ink is fresh. His mentor Paul writes a letter to ground him. Paul does not offer a complicated, 10-step strategy for church growth. He does not tell him to build a political coalition. He points Titus to a single future moment. Titus chapter 2, verse 13. Paul tells him to live upright lives while waiting for the blessed hope. He calls it the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. The word Paul uses for appearing here is the Greek epiphania.